Well, good morning and welcome to the Coffee Break podcast. This is Chad Lingefelt here with
Levi Gray.
And over on the other side, Lucas Ward. Good morning, Lucas.
Hello, Internet.
Hey, and I think everything is working this time. We have tried this live broadcast of the recording of our podcast, and it seems like every week something doesn't work accurately, like one microphone isn't functioning correctly, or the video doesn't work right, or the recording actually doesn't work. But it looks like everything is working well, and really excited to be here today. One real cool thing, just to mention before we get started, is now you didn't hear this on the Facebook Live, but we have a jingle now. It took us 5 episodes, but we have a jingle. And it was written and recorded by our very own Sam Gray.
It's wonderful.
That? It's amazing.
It's good.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a jingle for our podcast.
It's a pretty good jingle.
It is a really good
Quite
jingle.
jingly.
And part of the jingle talks about drinking lattes. So I made myself a latte today.
Someone put this empty cup here for me to pretend like I'm drinking a latte.
That's probably leftover from yesterday, so it was probably used by someone else. I don't know that I would sip on that if I were you.
Yeah, let's not.
Still smells good.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this 5th episode of our Coffee Break podcast, which, again, I've said this before, but just for context, Levi and myself did several test episodes trying to see if we could get this thing functional, and man, we have a lot of episodes that will never see the light of day, but we did get a chance to kind of test it out, and we're really excited to try to make this a consistent thing every Tuesday that we're launching our live podcast. And then obviously it's out on Anchor, it's on iTunes podcast, Apple Podcasts, it's on Spotify, Google Podcast, anywhere that you can get those podcasts. They are available for you. Just search for Coffee Break or Loc-Doc Security, and you'll find it. Right, Levi?
That's right.
Cool. Well, let's kind of do some quick introduction, because I know everybody has been on the podcast before, but just kind of a reintroduction of who everybody is and kind of what your role and responsibilities are, so that we can understand. Because today's going to be a really fun conversation. I've been looking forward to this for the last couple of days as we've been prepping for it. And so we'll get into the meat of the topic for today, which is going to be placing action on ideas. But before we get into that, Levi, give us a quick rundown of who you are, what's going on, what's happening, what's jiving. Let's jive, Turkey.
I'm Levi Gray. I start out doing customer service, but really I kind of have been assisting with improvements of processes on every level of every department. And just recently, we're making developments to kind of overhaul the dispatch scheduling department. So I'm kind of helping out with some of that role and stepping in so we can start making improvements there. And so far, so good. But that's basically what's taking up most of the time these days. So
a big chunk of what you're doing is interacting with customers every single day. And
Yes.
And part of that is implementing new processes or coming up with new processes to make that
customer
better
experience.
Yeah, that customer experience better, to be more functional, and which is, again, really, really a neat part of how we're going to have this conversation today. So on the other side of the room,
I'm Lucas Ward. I'm app developer here at Loc-Doc Security. My main job is to kind of set up new processes, automate things, and when Levi, comes to me with his list of improvements, we get together, have a little Scrum session, and try to look at ways that we can actually implement those into the company and the workfall management system.
what is a Scrum session?
A Scrum session is something that
word gets thrown around
It
really
does.
loosely
It's,
around here. We don't know what it means.
We're not full Scrummers here. We just kind of utilize the name as a joke, but really what it is it's just like a quick time each week to get together, discuss improvements, discuss ideas for the week, and it's mainly, I think, beneficial to the people that are trying to provide feedback, and myself trying to receive that feedback and discuss the improvements in a constructive manner. And it's also kind of just an excuse to have some more coffee.
Yeah, exactly. Which ultimately, the way that this all kind of got started was based off of some of the Scrum sessions and some of those kind of. Levi used to have a 2:00 coffee break, and he would come into our office and he would make coffee, and then we would have a lot of interesting conversations about kind of the stuff that we've been talking about here on the podcast for a while. And so we kind of said, hey, this is interesting information. Maybe it'll be beneficial to other companies out there as well. And that's kind of why we started recording. So should we have just called this the Scrum
Maybe, and not to jump the gun either, but
Yeah.
these Scrum sessions are ways to turn ideas into actions. So you have a lot of ideas bouncing around in your head, and things you want to do. Getting with somebody and talking it out and putting together a game plan and listing actionables. That's how you start. It's a starting point.
Yes, you have to. There's thought leaders, people that come up with ideas, and that's kind of where we're moving into the conversation today. Is ideas are great. What do you do with them?
Right.
Before we get to that, there's a couple of things that I wanted to throw out there for our podcast audience and for everyone that's kind of listening and watching online. Is I want to continue to try to make this interactive. I want folks to comment, but also to send us questions or send us feedback on, hey, that was interesting information, or that was really absurd. Like that actually does not work. We've tried that before. Like feedback is kind of what we're looking for. We're taking a little break of our day to set in here, have a conversation, record it, and then send it out just to in an effort to help maybe somebody else that's going through some of the same processes that we are. So we definitely want to engage with that. You can connect with us on all of the social media avenues, Facebook, obviously, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. What else is out there? That's pretty much all the important ones, right?
MySpace.
You can find us on MySpace, and obviously our website, locdoc.net, is a popular place to go. So check that out and connect with us. You just search for Loc-Doc Security or any of these guys on here by first and last name, and you'll be able to find them, except for Lucas. He has screen names, right?
Well, you can find me on Instagram at psychward061515, and our internet web is pretty huge, so you find any one of these places and you'll be able to see everything linked together.
Yes, most definitely. All right, so that is kind of where we are right now, and then let's kind of get moving on into the topic of discussion. So a wise man once said a few days ago that you can have ideas, but if you do not take action on them, then those ideas die. So how do you take the ideas and turn them into action?
That's right.
That was a smart guy, right?
Yeah, who was that guy?
Probably
Brilliant.
Lucas.
I don't know who
Good
it
job, Lucas. No, I actually, this part of this conversation, Levi brought up last week in our Wednesday. Every Wednesday morning between 7 and 8:30, we have an all-team meeting here at our offices. And Levi has, on the first meeting of every month, we have a kind of an operational meeting where a lot of the departments give a presentation on what's happening, so forth. Levi brought up the idea of this. So kind of break that down for us. Give us an introduction to what we're going to be talking about today.
So, and this is something that I've been thinking about and reading a lot of in my personal time and trying to apply it to work as well. And it's just kind of come about in work. Especially, I think probably the first time it kind of came up was Chad. We had a lot of catchphrases that we used, a lot of great ideas that we kind of spouted off in the meetings, like, what is it? Do the small things or make the small things count. And so we continually say that to the technicians, and then Chad began to ask, well, what does that even mean? Like, what are the small things, And so he started asking us, like, make specific, defined things that we can do, actionable items. And so that kind of spurred on, and I just started thinking about just really in every area of our workplace, every area we have our ideas that help kind of give us meaning and give us purpose and goals to drive us. But if we never give those ideas any real grounded, actionable things, then it is really,
It's just an idea.
Yeah, it's just an idea. It's just floating in space, and there's nothing to it. So every idea has to have an action to make it real, to make it happen. So I think it's such an important thing to think about. An important balance to take is that making sure that every action you take has some purpose or goal behind it, but also that every goal or purpose you set for yourself, that you have an actionable item tied to it that helps you to, what's the first step you can take to make that goal happen?
It's interesting. At the beginning of every year, for the past 5 years or so, we've really focused on, as an organization, we try to set some goals for an organization, which I don't think we did really well for a long period of time. But but this last year, we're trying to get better at that, obviously. But one of the things that we did do is we challenged everyone on our team to set goals for that coming year. Some personal goals, maybe some health goals, maybe some business goals, or whatever the case may be. And one of the things that we talk about this every year at the beginning for the last couple of years is SMART goals, something that can be achievable and trackable. Like, you have to have those small, tangible little ways to make sure that you're working towards the goal versus it just being this big goal. Like, I want to run a marathon, but I don't know how to start. Like, I don't have the action to start into that. And that's obviously a physical goal. But that's kind of that idea that we've been talking about, is how do we take those cool ideas that we come up with, or those grandiose ideas, and then put them into actionable steps?
You know, it's great to have these really high-level goals. Like, one of Chad's goals is to take over the world. I'm not sure if you knew. But if that idea or goal can then breed some kind of sub-ideas, you know, like if you can take whatever your mega end goal is and break it down into smaller obtainable goals, and then build, you know, actions that you can do to reach those goals around those smaller ideas, then you're on your way to that huge goal. And even if it takes you, you know, 100 years or 100 generations to actually take over the world, Chad, if you make progress, then it feels good, and you know you're obtaining something. So it's all about breaking it down into the smaller things and working towards those small things.
Those small steps tell you if you're working towards the goal. If you don't have that, then it's not trackable. Yeah. So at that point, again, it's just that idea. So from that concept that's kind of come up, and the way that we've been talking about that, and really been challenging everybody in our organization, when you lay out a blanket statement, when you throw out something that could be considered vague, always challenge yourself back on defining what does that mean. That's kind of part of the philosophy of setting clear expectations, is we want to have good, clear expectations. In order to do that, we have to define them well. So, you know, Lucas, we need you to make improvements on TrackVia in our work order management system. But if we can't define what those improvements are, then that's subjective to what you believe that you've made improvements on. Right? Oh, I cleaned up the code on the back end. Nobody knows what you did, and it doesn't show anything for anybody else. So
saving milliseconds,
saved milliseconds, right? And Levi, you know, one of the things we've said is, you know, we want to improve how we communicate with our customers. If we don't have actionable steps on that, or if we can't break that down into something that's digestible and understandable, then we don't know if we're making traction on it. You know?
Yeah, and I think one thing that I developed from basically for our meetings, I was realizing we have our team huddles every Wednesday after our morning meeting, in which each of the departments kind of goes over what's going on that week, what they're struggling with, what's their next big thing, et cetera, et cetera. But I was noticing the structure that I was following, I had nothing tangible or actionable tied to it. And so I was like, I need to create my own. So in order to take the ideas that I had and the things that I wanted to convey, I had to put an actionable report in, and it says, these are the number of calls we're getting. These are the number of calls we're answering. These are the number of work orders we're getting. These are the numbers of emails we're getting. So being able to take that, so now I can communicate to the team and give them something real, something like, hey, here's where we're at. Here's what I need help with. Instead of just, just to be honest, saying stuff like, oh, well, we're doing great this week. Good job. And it's like, we could be doing horrible, and I'm just saying great. It's
Correct.
Subjective. There's nothing real tangible for people to go off of. So it makes it harder for my team to help me out. And it makes it harder for really myself to provide you guys with feedback.
So every idea, we need actionable items to implement. What are some ideas that have come up over the past several months, or maybe even over the last year, that you've seen, Lucas, that we've either struggled with putting actionable items to it, and then they failed, or maybe some that we've applied good action steps and then they've actually been implemented and we've seen success with them.
Well, I think the best example currently is this inventory management system. We've been talking about it. We know what the end goal is, but how do you get from point A to point B? And so, creating those actionables, the small things that you can get working on is absolutely key. But in addition to that, you have to be passionate about the idea. If you aren't consumed by it, if you aren't really focused on, hey, I want this to come to fruition. I want this inventory management system to be the bomb diggity. Well, you're not going to get there by just dreaming about it. You have to write down the steps, and you have to look at those steps. You have to consider them. You maybe have to change them. You have to be willing to throw out everything you've already done and restart, because maybe the initial path you took wasn't the correct path. And, making those decisions and kind of going into retrospect and entrusting in your colleagues that, are saying, hey, I've seen this in action, this works, and, well, this place did it like this and it wasn't so great. That feedback is invaluable, but allowing it to kind of to drive your actions and, your decision making is key.
Over to you, Levi. What are some things that some ideas that we've come up with that have never had action steps applied to them and they've just fallen flat, or again, same thing, some that we've seen success with?
Yeah, so I think, like I said before, one of the things was, where we say, do the small things, where we had several things that we were telling the technicians, do this. I remember when I first started, we had this thing where it was, I'm trying to remember, there were 3 things, and it was making a mark, and do you remember them? I'm trying to remember it.
I could probably find them. I don't remember them off the top, but obviously it was very impactful for all of us.
Yeah, right. It was kind of some very early level things, but it was, what we were doing was we were trying to get the technicians to give us examples of ways that they made a mark on the customer. Prior planned, and then there was one other thing, but ultimately it was all just basically doing a great job, doing the job well, making a mark on the customer. And so we were like, give us a good example.
Well, kind of bringing that into context. So we have this saying around here that we've adopted from other people, obviously, but prior planning prevents poor performance. Mm-hmm. And the challenge was, even in the early days of that, is, okay, that's great, hoorah, but what does it mean to prior plan, and how can I do it effectively every day? What are little things that I can do to actually prior plan? And we didn't have actionable steps that we could do to that. So what you're talking about, we tried to break down, what does prior planning mean, and then what are ways that we can exemplify that every week. Give us an example in our group of how we are prior planning. Give us an example of how we made a mark with a customer. Give us an example of how we, went above and beyond in a certain area, and so that we could understand, just as an organization, this is what it means. These are the actionable things that it means to implement this idea of prior planning prevents poor performance, or to, providing great customer service. And we wanted to understand an actionable thing that worked, so that we could then, take that and apply it individually. Is kind of the concept, I believe, that you're talking about. Yeah,
and I wrote about this in my blog recently, that basically, in order for an idea to really impact you, it's not just about learning it, but it's about seeing it. You have to see. And I don't know who it was that said this, but it was, very recently I heard it, and it may have been from someone here. It was, don't just tell, show. So, that works with your kids, that works with people, your friends, people if you're trying to teach someone something, don't tell them the thing, show them the thing. Because
actions speak louder than words.
Exactly. Now, the idea is important because every action has an idea behind it. So you got to make sure that you're teaching them or showing them the right thing. But if you're trying to teach them something, make sure you're showing them you're doing something specifically to give them like I said in my blog, put a face and a body on the thing that you're trying to teach them.
So I feel like we need some actionables for this whole thing about ideas turning into actions. So if you want your ideas to turn into actions, start small. Just make a list. Take out a scratch piece of paper and write down the things that you want to do. And even if you never see that piece of paper again, or it gets lost or burnt up or whatever, you wrote it down. The process of writing it down, visualizing it, and using your hand to make the shapes of the letters, it's gonna do something magical. It's gonna start the cogs moving inside your brain, and just by writing, well,
some of us have cogs in our brains,
right,
Lucas.
well,
some of us don't.
Your synapses firing, whatever happens inside your head, but it's gonna get the process of started. And that, I know that sounds crazy, but it's really, once you've done that one thing, it's very easy to then say, well, I remember I had this list. Let me create another list. And this time I'm going to put it on my fridge or in my notebook or on my computer or whatever. And then just go back and look at it. If you get lost, go back and review those actionables. And if you need to add to that list, then do it. And it's all about doing.
Yeah, so a few weeks back, maybe a month or so back now, I don't remember, I put together a video based off of a process that I learned on how to develop a strategic priority, something that you want to focus on, kind of list out all these things. I won't go through all that detail because it's out there in many facets, but once you find that strategic priority, that's the idea. That's the thing that I'm going to focus my energy on and work on. Next step is what you're talking about, and what you're talking about is I've got to break that idea down into dates and actions. Yeah. So here's an example. This is a timely example because this is something that we are working on right now in our business. A week ago, a little less than a week ago, there were about a half a dozen of us in the organization that met in the evening to talk out some of the operational issues that we were having. We're a growing organization, and we've implemented new processes, and we've changed things, and it's caused other things to break, and so then we have to go back in and figure out how to fix those, and it's kind of always a toss-up and back and forth. But one of the things that we realized is that there's, with a lot of the things in our organization, we're very innovative. We have broken the mold in a lot of areas, and I don't say that bragging. I'm just saying it from a factual standpoint that we have really just challenged the status quo on a lot of stuff, with the exception of one area in our company, which is the way that we schedule and we organize our site visits. We've been doing it the same way for the past probably 15 or 20 years. And so we had a conversation about it, and we weren't even having a conversation about that. We were having a conversation about some auxiliary issues that were coming up from a result of that, and it just was not kind of flowing with some of our new processes. So from that came an idea to change up and kind of really toss out the old way of doing things and implement a new way of scheduling and processing things. That was night one. Night two was last night. Yep. And we came back and said, okay, let's vet out some of these issues and some of these things with this new process. But really the big thing was we talked for, an hour and 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. And then we had this thing of, okay, this is the idea, but we can walk out of here in 45 minutes and this whole thing just dies unless we craft dates and actions and then make them matter. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of the whole concept of that, right? So we you can talk more about that, Levi, because you were there in the meeting last night, but that was kind of that concept is, this is the idea, now what are we going to do to implement it? And that's, I think, where a lot of small businesses, I would consider myself to be one of these guys that comes up with a lot of ideas, but then when it comes down to actually defining the actions, I struggle with. Yeah. And I would venture that a lot of other people have that same issue. So now it's the idea. Now, how do we get that idea into action?
Yeah. So, and I think that's the meeting that we had. It's really a small picture of the way I think our business just kind of, it's a cycle. It's constantly, let's evaluate our actions to make sure that we are, they're matching up to the ideas and the goals that we want to follow. And then you have to periodically evaluate the ideas and goals and say, are we putting these into action? And so we had this kind of a high-level structural overview in the first meeting, and then we set into place last night. It was, okay, so what's the next step? And sometimes you can't even sometimes it can be overwhelming to try sometimes you just can't plan the whole goal, especially if your goal is to take over the world. But you just have to say, all right, well, what's the next step? And very interestingly, my wife and I are very different in this way. So my wife is very detail oriented, just steps, things like that, like real world. And I'm very like high level thinking about concepts and abstracts. And so a lot of times I can forget about how to do it or all the steps and stuff. I'm like, what does this mean? And so she'll get frustrated because she's like, okay, yeah, you give me all these ideas, but what am I supposed to do with this? So I've always thought about, like, I'm a kite and I'm just like, flying up in the air and I'm all in the clouds. But someone has to hold the string to the kite so it doesn't just fly off into oblivion. And so, but that's really what it is if you hold on to that kite string and you make sure that it's grounded, then it'll go where you want it to go. It'll fly and be awesome.
Great analogy.
Is that kind of like a water balloon?
It's like a water balloon. Yes, I'm sure I could somehow twist that into a water balloon analogy.
I think that a lot of people struggle with the fear of change, the fear of failure. I have this process I want to change, but I'm so used to doing it this way. This is how I've always done it. And what does it feel like to go from doing something you're used to doing that you've always done to completely different? And the answer is scary, and a lot of people aren't willing to make that change or need somebody to help them. And so personally in my line of work, I remember very distinctly trying to work with QuickBooks Online to do this accounting integration. And I went to Chris Lowry and I said, I'm concerned that these updates are going to set us back 10 steps before we can go forward. And he just very calmly told me, he's like, if you need to burn down TrackVia, if you need to break it, destroy it to make it better, then just do it. And, first of all, to be given permission to burn down anything is awesome. But then secondly, it really made me feel good about it, because it's like, I know that the end goal is better than where we are now. And even if we have to take a few steps back, that it'll be worth it. And so just, no inhibitions, go out and do it.
Well, it's part of challenging. It's part of challenging the way that things are.
Yes.
And that's kind of what we want to try to focus on here continually is, why are we doing it this way? Is there an actual reason behind it? If not, there is, what is that reason, and is it still applicable? If not, then why are we doing it that way? If there's no reason behind it, then let's figure out what we can do to improve it. I was having a conversation with a gentleman yesterday, got invited to another podcast, and we were talking about it, and I said, one of the questions that he asked was the why, like, the whole Simon Sinek question, the why behind what you do. And when I first heard that concept, Chris and I sat and locked ourselves in our conference room for several hours to figure out the why behind our business. And at that point, we came up with that we believe there's a better way. That was the concept. We've now transformed that over to always improving is kind of the way that I go about it now, because we believe there's a better way is like a really long sentence.
And
it's not hashtagable.
You can see this concept applied within our business, but also with, how we treat our customers. Their salespeople, they go out and they're not interested in just selling locks. They're interested in selling you better locks and, improved solutions. And so if you embrace something as an organization and, you just live by it, then eventually that's what your organization will be known for.
Yeah, and it just takes – so all of that to say, and I thought about this earlier when we were talking about it, all of these things happen when especially the concept that you brought up earlier about don't tell them, show them.
Yeah.
The key factor in what you just said, Lucas, in my opinion, is consistency.
Yeah.
If you can be consistent in your actions that you derive from your ideas, then you'll be showing people what you're going to do, not just telling them about it, but you're going to be consistent in showing them. And in the same way, to implement culture change, to implement thought change, it's consistency over ideas. Yeah. And that's what a lot of people struggle with. That's what I struggle with a lot, and that's what I challenge myself with daily, and this organization with as well, is we can implement a new process tomorrow, but if we're not consistent with it, because when you change a process, it gets tough. Yeah. Like you will get challenged in every way, shape, and form. And if you really believe that's the new way, then you have to have consistency in it and wait it out to see if it's going to take if it's gonna actually take root and make a big difference. But the consistency is the big factor. You can't just tell people you're going to do something different and then not be consistent in it, or else they lose faith in the fact that you're going to actually do it. If that makes any sense.
Totally.
Cool.
Yeah, and especially for our business, customer experience is huge. And so making sure that we can say always improving, but if the customer says we're always getting worse, then we need to change things. Yeah. So it's all about, like you said, what are we showing? Are we showing them that we're always improving? Do they see that, or do they just see someone with a tagline?
Yeah.
And so it's taking those ideas and putting them in action.
Yeah, actions on your motto and your tagline is something. You can have it all day long, but if you're not showing it, then it's completely different. Cool, guys. Hey, thank you for the great conversation today. I know our time is coming to a close because we need to be mindful of the day's events, but I really appreciate you guys taking some time out of your busy days to come in and chat, and we look forward to our next episode where we have, I believe, a special guest from out of town that will be joining us, hopefully on the screen over here. So, but in the meantime, we invite you to connect with us online, all of our social media avenues, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, our website, locdoc.net, and if you have any other questions, any closing comments?
Nope.
Guys?
It's been wonderful.
We'll see you next time right here on our coffee break.